it was the chaos that everyone had to go through.
Mhm.
But we were, our model was like that of many organizations. It was very adaptive, so we were able to pivot. And it was really awful. I'm not going to pretend that was not the hardest thing I, had to do in my 30 years, but we survived, and it was very difficult.
Everything felt like a challenge, but I don't know, like, I think it was constantly adapting everything, and there wasn't really no, like, that's how life was for everyone. The regulations kept changing, and so we had to adapt all the programming and then communicate that to the volunteers that we work with, and then get feedback on how that was going. And by the time you felt like you had a grasp of that, then the regulations changed again.
I hadn't, we don't sit down very often and like go through the timeline of, well, then we did that, and then we did that, and we started this program, then we had to change this. And then when you look at the last 2 years in that way, you're like, oh, I wonder I feel this way. Oh, it all makes sense.
We all were in the same boat at the same time, and I think everybody acted as fast as they could and learned as we went. So yeah, the challenges were many.
It's also challenging the implementation of new restrictions, and then lifting, and then implementing new restrictions, and then lifting them again for generation services. Because September, last summer we started to resume in-home visits. Then September we reopened the activities, and then December everything closed again, back online. Was a little bit disappointing.
They said, okay, well, we can offer these activities on a limited scale. And at that time, we were struggling with the spacing issues, because there was a time where everybody had to be like 2 meters from another person. So your activity that normally could have, 200 people, you're down to 50. You don't have the space. So physical space was an issue. It was restart activities that you have to cancel. Then you're dealing with the cancellation, then, creating new activities. But this time the activities, you have to rethink about how you're going to design all your spacing, because you have social distancing that you have to do. People have to wear masks. So I could see that for the community agencies, there was a lot of work adapting, because we lived through it, adapting our own activities here for the population. And I would say that it was only in September of 2021 that then we started to be able to open up.
So when the restrictions have been lifted, we've been allowing indoor meetings, right? But these indoor meetings were reduced from, before the pandemic, were 2.5 hours, and they passed to first 45 minutes. And then once the vaccine were implemented and the lift of restrictions after the vaccine, we allowed in 1 hour, but we not allowing more, 2.5 hours, because of the time exposure to the virus is higher.
Before the pandemic, we were doing 3 days a week of in-house lunch and 3 days a week of Meals on Wheels. So, but with the pandemic, it was very difficult for the programming side, because we had to do extra, like sterilizing everything. So like spraying, there was all this extra work that didn't exist before on the same level. Cleaning, and also, really people managing, like trying to keep everybody distanced, making sure everyone's wearing their masks, making sure everyone's sanitizing. For the lunch, it was really complicated tried to make sure that everyone was sitting where they were supposed to sit, and people would show. We had them booking in advance, so we would know like, okay, there's going to be 18 people or something, and that's something we never did before. And our membership was really like, they just couldn't get the hang of it. But that so often, and I would never turn anyone away to eat ever. So you know, we'd think 18 people are coming or something, and then like 25 people would show up. And so it was like, that was a really, for the staff, it was like a lot to manage, to set the tables and all that stuff. It was really chaotic. So to close all that down, to close all that down in December was really like pretty devastating to us that have got, because it took a long, you know, we were like rebuilding our volunteer base, rebuilding sort of our rhythm, getting the word out that we were open again. And then we had to close all that down.
Ben, c'est sûr que pour le personnel, j'en ai parlé un tout petit peu déjà là. Moi et mes collègues, bon, on a pris le pli virtuel, mais ça a surtout été, ça n'a pas été vraiment un enjeu en soi, mais ce qui a été un enjeu, c'est le fait de tout déprogrammer et reprogrammer, qui a été un petit peu compliqué. Et la crainte de recevoir des gens chez soi, là, on a tous eu plus ou moins cette crainte-là à un moment donné. Ça dépend de notre exposition et nos facteurs de risque. Mais oui, même les réunions à domicile, pendant un moment, c'était potentiellement dangereux.
I think the community sort of respond. I think the community helped support people through the isolation and being aware of and creative. You know, I know New Hope did a visiting program where they bought folding chairs for outside. So if you went somewhere, you could, you know, it wasn't a problem that you nowhere to sit. We had our chairs. And that was creative. You know, it was smart. So I think the community really responded in a creative way by helping and by knowing who their clients were, or the population they serve is, and what their needs are, and how to try and respond to that.
So we adapted the programs feels so long ago now, at the beginning, by removing in-home visits. They just seemed too high risk, and switched a lot of it to phone calls. And so I think before we were doing about less than a dozen calls, and then it ballooned up to 100, so half of our membership were getting calls from us. And they were meant to be a check-in call, and then the calls got really long.
La première, c'est sûr. Toutes les autres ont eu un impact plutôt minime, j'ai l'impression, puisqu'on était déjà adaptés. Donc, c'est juste, oui, il y a eu parfois quand il y avait une nouvelle vague, du coup, il y avait tel événement présentiel qu'on devait annuler. Mais plus ça va, plus on était habitué, et plus chaque nouvelle vague devenait un petit peu soit une routine, soit quelque chose d'attendu de toute façon. Mm-hmm. Donc, ça fait plus de 2 ans et demi là qu'on n'a pas misé vraiment sur un format 100% présentiel. On n'est pas parti à dire, tiens, on va faire un congrès sur le sujet qui nous habite. Donc, non, l'impact des vagues très minime. Là, c'est surtout la première qui nous a forcé à faire un tournant. Mais une fois que le tournant était pris, ça n'a pas été significatif, les autres vagues.
I mean, it gave us lots of opportunities. The grocery program was a wonderful collaboration between ACT and us and the CLSC. That was a really great relationship to have begun. That's how I met Andrea who's doing the garden. So that's a really exciting thing for us, and something that we had been sort of stewing in our minds that we wanted to move towards, a direction that was kind of missing for us. Centropole de Rouen, for example, they have more of a sustainable mandate in terms of, and we kind of wanted to move in that direction as well. So, so that's very exciting. That would not have happened if COVID hadn't occurred. So that's, it was an opportunity to sort of change the way that we work and how we think about the organization and how we service people as well. you know, asking our members and our clients to be more flexible with us, also understanding that, you know, we're only 5 staff, and you know, we're trying our very best. We don't have 100 people at our disposal anymore to solve the problems. I mean, we were really on a good track before December, so it's very disappointing to us now that we kind of lost that volunteer base, that we're like re-beginning again. It just is what it is.